Hello and welcome to the 17th in my CPD Coffee Time series. Today I'm going to focus on self-care for parents and teachers, for us adults, in the COVID-19 pandemic. As many of you will know, I am a psychologist, an educational and child psychologist, and also an author. I've written extensively for Nurture UK. You'll find many of my publications with them. I also work as a consultant psychologist and therapeutic supervisor for Compass Fostering. I'm totally committed to providing evidence-based, practical, user-friendly resources for practitioners in schools and in other services who support the well-being and nurturing of our children and young people. So you'll find lots of my publications, most recently with Hinton House Publishers, with the wonderful publisher Sarah Miles. I've just popped this slide in because I love this picture. It makes me feel calm, and this is my therapy. I do actually live and breathe the stuff that I preach, so hopefully that will become clear in this presentation too. So the key aims today are to ensure that we all understand the need for essential self-care and the impact of this new uncertainty on all of us to some extent. Also to define the links between adult dysregulation and child dysregulation, and recognise the potential that all of us currently have for secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. To focus on the fact that school systems need to be now developed to the extent that they can nurture all our children and enable effective modelling of management of anxiety and stress, so that whole notion of teaching self-regulation and modelling it for our children. And also I want to present some practical strategies and techniques that you can actually use now, remembering of course that one size does not fit all. We won't all use the same tools, strategies for self-care, but we may all benefit from just learning about different ones and different techniques, and then trial and error, see what actually fits for us, what's a best fit for us as individual human beings. So we continue to be in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, and it appears to be ongoing, and we know that the impact is extremely significant now. And notwithstanding the fact that schools are currently going back, many of them, there are some difficulties. I've just read a report today where 2 children have tested positive in Kent schools. So there's something kind of quite unnerving about the uncertainty and the inability that we all have now to actually gain a total sense of control, which most of us would like more of. And I think this is really, really important. And that underlying anxiety and fear factor is there for all of us. So it's more important than ever that we develop appropriate self-care. The impact is on us all. It's not just our children who are experiencing high levels of stress. I think as parents, carers, professionals, we are all having to navigate what is a very, very different complex situation and try to develop ways and means of being able to cope with this so-called new normal. So I think all of us now are going to need to engage in self-care. We're going to need to take some additional time to acclimatise to new rules, new situations, new contexts, new ways of being. And we're going to need some time to reflect on how we feel about things and find our calm, find our ability, our ways of finding peace within this whole mess, basically. And also to communicate our worries to others and connect with them. This is going to be more important than ever at this time. And the effects of vicarious trauma, of course, I've done a whole session on this in the CPD series, but I think it is really important to flag this up again. This is the risk for all of us who really care and listen to the narratives of our children and young people at this time, particularly when they are suffering high levels of anxiety and stress. And the fact that actually over time this accumulates for us and we tend to absorb much of what we're actually hearing. Many of us will have gone home and worried about children and specific individuals, but we will, all of us, be now far more at risk of developing vicarious trauma. And we know, to be frank, that there is more of a risk for those of us who work with children, young people with mental health difficulties. We empathise with them. We experience along with them their feelings of helplessness, anger and fear. And I think that's really, really difficult. We need to actually take very careful note of staff who are parents who've got histories themselves of childhood trauma, because they may be at particular risk of experiencing these kinds of reactions at this time, much more vulnerable to it. So we do need to actually engage in watchful waiting amongst our staff team. It's quite possible that for some of us our coping mechanisms will become overwhelmed, and that reduces our ability to care. We feel helpless, we can feel detached from others, from our co-workers, from our team members, and also from family and friends. So these are the kind of signs and signals we need to really be looking out for and trying to get in there earlier, as early as possible, in terms of actually putting in place an appropriate self-care plan that can prevent the escalation of these difficulties. The problem for us, I think, with vicarious trauma in particular, is that we can feel really burdened and overwhelmed, and there is the possibility that we might just try and push ourselves that wee bit too much to extend ourselves beyond what we're actually really capable of. And I think it can really also lead to deeper sense of sort of loss of meaning, really, and loss of hope in our lives, and ultimately a sense that there is no hope. And I think we need to be very, very careful here, because this kind of notion that it's not worth living is really the kind of high end of this continuum in terms of vicarious trauma, and needs to be avoided at all costs. So really take some time to look out for these signs. At this current time, just make sure, are you managing your emotions okay, or are you having problems sleeping? Are you making rash decisions? Are you not keeping to your boundaries? These are common signs of vicarious trauma, and we need to be really aware of them and self-reflect on a daily basis. Heightened levels of anxiety, of course, and a sense of isolation, and also engaging in higher levels of substance abuse or alcohol intake, and potentially cynicism, negativity, and just a general sense of apathy, about life and the world in general. So just really key factors to look out for. And if you're someone who does tend to avoid those difficult feelings, or blame others for their difficulties, or withdraw if things get tough, or if you've had really quite deep problems in the past in terms of your experiences of trauma as a young child, then I think it's really, really important. You are more at risk potentially, so you need to actually create a bigger piece of armour for yourselves at this point in time. So if you're doing this with a group of colleagues or just on your own, it doesn't matter, but if you're with a group of colleagues, stop the presentation and just have some time to reflect on these questions. It's important that we're really honest, authentic in our thinking here. If we're going to actually intercept these things at the earliest possible opportunity. Is this you as a teacher, carer, parent, support staff member? Has listening to children's experiences of lockdown or COVID trauma during this period of time impacted upon you negatively? Was there any transference, absorption? Did you feel a loss of safety, control, or freedoms yourself? And how have your normal self-care routines been disrupted? Have you been able to maintain them and your support networks or not? These are questions I think we all need to focus on if we're going to, honestly identify a really good way forward for ourselves in terms of maintaining our well-being. And at the outset, I have to say, this is such an important message. Self-care is not selfish. It is an essential. If we are going to nurture children and young people who are experiencing heightened levels of anxiety and some impact certainly of trauma during this lockdown period and going back into school when things are so uncertain, then we need to have our glasses full. We need to have our own oxygen mask on, and that is not selfish, it's simply essential. Key elements to this notion of self-care, it's around keeping in good physical condition, being aware of ourselves, our bodies, our thinking patterns, our emotions, showing and giving kindness, making good choices, paying attention to our bodies, how we feel and how others feel, getting our priorities right, being curious and exploring rather than frightened and shutting down, opening up to our communities, seeking connection, but slowing down as well, and we're going to need to do a lot more of that, I think, now. Getting the right support and asking for it, it's a positive, it's a strength to ask for support. Ensuring that there is enough pleasurable flow activities, I'm going to talk about flow a little bit later on, in your daily life, in your daily cycles, and also acceptance, self-acceptance, acceptance of what it is that we're dealing with and the fact that we can't control it, and acceptance that we need to focus on what we can now control. So why focus on us as adults? Every child matters. This was Andrews in 2006. And so does every adult. And adults have to matter because we're the ones who are going to nurture and foster the well-being of our children. Balby, as far back as 1951, said, if a community values its children, it must cherish its parents. I'd also extend that to thinking about the needs of staff, teachers, LSAs, TAs, inclusion managers, mental health leads, etc., who work daily with vulnerable, challenging children. We know that secondary stress, as I said, can affect attitudes and behaviour of the adults who work with children who have social, emotional, mental health difficulties. But that sense of being contained is essential for us because there is a higher emotional labour involved in this kind of work. About 10 years ago, I did some research into staff wellbeing and found that there was no formal way that they seemed to have in schools, teaching staff in schools, of actually processing aspects of their work. There was a lack of supervision and support, basically. And pastoral support were providing this kind of containing function for pupils, parents and colleagues' anxieties. And I think being emotionally available to others who are in distress does have a psychological impact on them, and did. And this was evident in the research. So my research, in addition to literature regarding stress and burnout in teachers, advocates the importance of meeting the emotional wellbeing needs of staff if we want them to effectively meet the emotional wellbeing needs of their pupils. This was true then, and it is certainly true now. If you look at the variety of Unilever's brands, sounds a bit wacky, but I'm diverting slightly to make a point. It's very, very interesting. Huge multinational organisation. Look at all these brands. Their CEO then, at the time of looking into this and researching it, was very, very clear that by listening and responding to the emotional needs of his staff, he would give them a much better chance of fulfilling their true potential. It's good for them, good for the company, it makes money for the company. So his sustainable living plan was something that I'm flagging up here for a very good reason now. Unilever set up a common framework with a common set of tools under these 4 pillars. It was called Lamplighter in the UK. Leadership and management, communication and culture, building resilience and developing employee wellbeing and support. Wonderful. So everyone in the community of Unilever could actually, with one click, one phone call or one discussion, get the help they needed if they were experiencing any issues with their health and wellbeing. So this involved on-site health checks, an employee assistance program, Get Active Fitness Challenge, personal resilience tool, mindfulness training online, and mental health manager awareness training. What they found in a 1-year period was that there was ultimately, as a result, direct result of implementing this strategy, a 25% decrease or reduction of the working days lost due to mental health after implementation of this mental health program. So my argument, obviously, here is that if it works for them, then surely why not for all of us? We know that teacher stress and retention are major issues. Burnout, emotional labour of teaching is an issue, the culture of long hours, lack of flexibility, paperwork overload, etc. And also, currently now, adapting to this so-called new normal of COVID. So more than ever, there is a need for us to be hardy individuals who are resilient, and we can manage this effectively, and to have management, senior leadership teams who really lead by example and ensure that the necessary resources are there within the school systems. I would also argue that resilience and wellbeing is not all down to the individual. There are shared responsibilities here for supervision and support and organisational culture and conditions. And basically, I do feel very, very strongly that if we're talking about looking after our wellbeing, self-care, then supervision systems should be there in schools, available to staff, particularly now at this current time. I did a whole session on peer group supervision if you want to reference back to that, and also how the organisation and culture and conditions are all set up in order to really promote the development of resilience and overall wellbeing. So what are the key objectives for management teams in creating such a resilient workplace? I would suggest it's the development of hardiness skills, development of individuals who just don't give up, they show true grit, they keep going, and a psychologically healthy work environment with access to immediate coping skills and resources as and when necessary. So that quiet room, the nurturing that should take place at break times and throughout the day, the monitoring of people's well-being, not by performance management, which just gives them a list of strategies and tools that they've got to undertake or tasks they've got to undertake, but actually asks about their well-being, provides the supervision necessary, and also gives them access to a range of different tools for their well-being toolboxes. And why so important? More than ever at this point in time, it's because we all know that unregulated adults cannot regulate unregulated children, and we have lots of those little children now who are becoming more and more unregulated, increasingly unregulated. So it's more important than ever that we maintain this for ourselves and we can regulate our own nervous systems, and we know how to do it. So essential. We also know that the emotional tone of a school or children's home is dramatically affected by the capacity of adults to regulate themselves. If they respond in a calm but engaged way, what they're actually doing is demonstrating an alternative way of managing stress. If we become dysregulated, what we're in effect doing is replicating the damaging environments, the trauma, the stress, the anxiety that characterised some children's earlier experiences and certainly characterised their current experiences during lockdown. And what is essential, of course, is that we understand the impact of trauma in all this, both for ourselves and on ourselves and on previous traumas in terms of our own childhoods, but also in terms of the children that we're currently caring for. If we're going to care for them effectively, Kolk described trauma as speechless terror. And he said that traumatised children might be slow to develop speech or might struggle to find words to describe their trauma or their feelings. And it can also affect the capacity to process verbal information. So very often they will struggle to follow complex directions. They may experience auditory selectivity, so that only one part of a verbal communication is heard. Their working memory may often be compromised, so they actually just cannot hold these things within their memory, all of these complex instructions. And very often as adults, there has been a problem here for some of us in terms of actually interpreting this failure to obey as being willful defiance. So children who've been traumatised have then been re-traumatised by being punished for their trauma experiences in the first place. So I think really, really important, we need to make sure that what we're doing in terms of responsiveness to our children and the systems we put in place really do ensure that these factors are considered. So we need to create safety routines first. This is what we can actually tell from the neuroscience, that children's brains will not function in terms of accessing anything cognitively, accessing the curriculum, academic learning, until they feel safe and their nervous system is regulated. So absolutely essential that it's safety first now for all of us. And this is part of self-care. We can eliminate some of the sensory triggers that affect children and young people negatively, and we can build in sensory cues which are soothing or appropriately stimulating. And this is really, really, really important. And just think about yourselves here too, and your own sensory environment, and how that does or does not help you to regulate, self-regulate. And also we can ensure that routines are very, very clear and expectations are set out, things are rehearsed for them in a way that actually makes them feel nurtured and safe. So very, very important, because with unexpected disruption, adults need to remember that there is a likely impact on children. They need to proactively intervene to help them and support them to stay calm, which means also by default staying calm yourself. So self-care does take priority now, and to achieve this we really do need to know how to engage in effective self-care, how to manage our own stress and anxiety, while simultaneously the need to also respond in a truly trauma-informed way in our classrooms and in our schools. It's never ever been more important that we know that children and young people are all experiencing some level of stress at the moment in the social and educational context, and that knowledge must impact upon our behaviour ourselves and the way in which we support and nurture them in school. So self-care being a priority, not a luxury, as we have made clear now. I'm just going to go through now six essential keys to well-being that I think we all need to take a look at and adopt. Key one is identify areas to change. If we want to engage in more positive thinking and move forwards in that way and become a more optimistic individual, then we need to think about areas of our lives that we usually think negatively about. And that might be to do with work, daily commute, relationships, routines, what we're actually engaging in at work. And we need to start small by focusing on one area to approach in a more positive way. So key 2 is check yourself. Periodically, intermittently, throughout the day, stop and evaluate what you're thinking. Stop and what is it I'm thinking at this current point in time? And if you find that your thoughts are mainly negative, try to find a way to put a positive spin on them or to challenge them and to engage in reframing. Key 3, and this is probably the one I use the most, be open to humour. Give yourself permission to smile or laugh, particularly when things are really stressful. And this isn't deflection, and it's not cynicism or sarcasm in any sense, making jokes of things that are very bad, but it's about just seeking a bit of humour in everyday situations and events, because we know that when we laugh we feel less stressed. It's an instant stress management tool for me. Key 4, follow a healthy lifestyle. I know it's easier said than done, but I think for many of us during lockdown we may have found new ways of keeping fit. And even if that's just going out for 30 minutes walking the dog, it's very, very important. If we can try and do that at least once a day, and possibly if we can't fit that in, then just do 10-minute chunks 3 times a day. We know the positive links between exercise and our mood, increasing serotonin, and I think this is really vital at this point in time. And also looking at what we're eating, because we know that that fuels our mind and body, so we've got to be very, very careful there. Learning new techniques to manage stress is also something that we need to do in terms of promoting this healthy lifestyle. Key 5, these connections with positive people, surrounding ourselves with those that nurture us, support us, and that we can reciprocate with in terms of supporting and nurturing them too. These are the people who give helpful advice and constructive feedback. They're not the psychic vampires or the narcissists. These are the people that we need to actually really cut out of our lives. And I am really clear about this. It is so, so important. These are the people who actually pull us down, make us feel ill ultimately. And when you start to feel that way, just take a little check and think, what is it? Who was I with? What was going on there? Why did I feel like that? We need to sometimes be pretty brutal on that one. And practice positive self-talk, not inauthentic, not something that is a bit meaningless, but just actually thinking very, very simply. Don't say anything to yourself you wouldn't say to anyone else. Why would you say a horrible thing to yourself when you wouldn't say it to someone else? You've got to actually try, I think, and be more gentle and encouraging with yourself. We have to engage in more self-acceptance, more self-love, dare I say it, without sounding cheesy. If we get negative thoughts, and we need to think about it rationally, evaluate it. How true is this? Is that really true? Is my thinking, is that thought or that feeling a fact, or is it not? And I think also try and think every day about what is good about ourselves and the things that we're thankful for. So 3 thankful things, 3 good things that happen each day that we are thankful for. So I often talk about children and young people and the need for them to develop their wellbeing toolbox, or their toolbox of wellbeing. And I think that it's no different for us. We need to really be mindful of this now and think about what it is that we're putting in our toolbox, because if it's not working, then we need to reflect on it, reevaluate it. Are we using affirmations? Are we engaging in physical activity and exercise? Are we using mindfulness on a daily basis? Meditation? Effective self-talk, which includes disputing those irrational thoughts that we might have about ourselves. Cognitive reframing, again, changing ineffective thinking into something more effective, not a positive to a negative to a positive, but actually, because that's too simplistic, it's changing something that's not helpful to something that's more helpful, ineffective to effective. And also possibly using visualization in order to actually self-soothe our nervous system. So just have a think, what is it that we need in our toolbox? We need to know how to do this stuff, in my view, if we're going to model and teach it to our children. And more things for your toolbox, and things that I certainly use a lot, such as anchoring, putting yourself back, visualizing and putting yourself back in your best possible time when you were the happiest, when you're feeling stressed, so that actually you start to get those memories and the physiological effects back with that wonderful experience again. Using breathing, grounding techniques, your grounding of your feet, breathing techniques, deep breathing. Self-compassion, again, let's be kinder to ourselves. If we're kind to ourselves, it'll be much easier for us to be kinder to others. And this one I think is really, really important. Just that simple thing of being in nature every day. Even if it rains, actually, I'm outside. At some point I'm outside. I want to hear the birds. I want to actually just breathe in the air, which oddly enough has got much fresher since we've kind of slowed down and we've not had so much air traffic. But I think that is vital. There's a direct link between being in nature and feeling better. And also I'm going to focus now a little bit on this notion of creativity, because we know that there is a link between happiness and creativity. And for many of us, our self-care toolbox possibly or probably does have some element of creativity in it. Happy people tend to do things which they feel stimulated and creative in doing. So, for example, from my personal perspective, I do lots of art, I do lots of writing. I actually find it really, really stimulating, and I love that element of creativity in my life on a daily basis. It makes me feel happy. And I think it's something to do with being absorbed and doing something where I know I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out, but it's lovely to see, so it's quite exciting. And this is what Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, called flow. It's an experience of flow. And I'm going to take some of the stuff now on the next slides from his book, which is called Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. We know that happy people continue to learn, and it enables them to feel alive and develop in their lives and work. It gives us a sense of purpose and meaning, and it really does need to be part, I think, of our self-care toolkits. So feeling creative, there are many, many different ways to be creative, and it's not necessarily just painting or writing. It can be in the kitchen, it can be on the sports field, it can be doing something DT-wise or gardening particularly. But I think there are many ways, so think about it as a much, much broader thing than just painting and singing and acting, etc. And just to flag up, this is Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, so the Psychology of Optimal Experience, just so that you can have that as a reference if you wanted to follow this further. What's interesting about Csikszentmihalyi's work is it does actually provide us with one of the keys to helping us to clarify when we feel creative. He spent decades studying when people felt really absorbed in an experience and produced or performed really fine work. So he studied painters, sculptors, surgeons, athletes, people recovering from accidents and from all different social spheres of life. And he recorded or recounted many of these examples in his book. So his study found that people enjoyed this sense of flow when they tackled a task that they had a chance of completing. This is important. You don't do something that you know you can't possibly get through or do. You concentrate, you have really clear goals, and you get immediate feedback from it. And this flow also involves them in experiencing this sense of really deep and effortless involvement, and that takes away the frustrations of everyday life. If I'm painting, for example, I can be sitting for a couple of hours sometimes and I don't notice time going past, which is fantastic. Also, they enjoy a sense of control over their actions, and they find that their concern for self disappears, although paradoxically the sense of self emerges stronger. And this notion that the experience is so enjoyable with flow, time sort of disappears. But also I'd say what else disappears is that my thoughts, it's a bit like using mindfulness techniques, my thoughts will become clearer. And I tend to focus so much on the tasks that I stop worrying about all the things like the COVID pandemic, my mother being 93 and shielding, etc., etc. That kind of goes. And that's really, really important for our well-being, to have those periods of relief from it, is what I call it. So there are 10 factors that accompany this experience of flow, and while many of these may be present, it's not actually necessary to experience all of them for you to experience flow, for flow to actually occur and happen for you. So factors 1 to 5: clear goals that are attainable, strong concentration and focus, intrinsically rewarding activities, feelings of serenity, so a sense that we're not self-conscious, timelessness, again, so focused on it you lose track of time passing. Factors 6 to 10, there's immediate feedback, you know the task is doable, so there's a good balance between your skill level and the challenge that's presented. You have a sense of personal control, And a lack of awareness of physical needs. Oddly enough, that's quite interesting. Do you go to the loo during your 2 hours, focus on your artwork, etc. And a complete focus on the activity itself, which again, for me, that's what takes away the anxiety. So if you're doing this again on your own or as part of a group, you might want to stop the presentation at this point and think about this particular exercise and have a go at doing it. This exercise invites you to explore how you can continue to experience a sense of flow. So it asks you to do 3 things. Describe a specific activity in which you experience this sense of flow. Now, it doesn't have to be art like me. It can be going out doing your running in the morning. It could be cooking. It could be playing the piano, anything you like, reading a book. But give some examples of when it's happened. And then think or describe the specific things you believe you may do right then, the principles that you may follow to experience that sense of flow. What are the principles you may follow? And is that about setting time apart? Is it about being prepared? Is it about being focused, etc.? And then the specific things you can do now to follow some of these principles in the future. So, or maybe to experience a sense of flow in this or other activities again, but more so. I think this is really, really important because, like anything else, if we don't plan these things and we don't plan to schedule them in, like activity scheduling, then we tend to kind of let them go a bit. So it has to be planned in sometimes, in my view. So another activity for you, in essence, now is to create your own flow plan. And I think this is a lovely thing to do. And I would really suggest that you do it. You stop here and you just write down 3 things, a dose of flow 3 times a day. So 3 things that you can do that you know now give you a sense of flow, allow you to experience flow. And just, be very, very clear about this. Specify where and when and the timings with whom you might engage in these activities, and try to create a balance between individual, group, social and work-based elements. You might experience flow if you're in a football match as part of a team. Much harder now with social distancing, that one. But I do think you need to actually write this down. It's like anything else. We make these goals, we make these plans, we aim to do things. I think there's a real power in actually scheduling it in and writing it down. So then you've got something to go back and review and think, if you didn't fit it in that day, why not? How could you make that happen? How could it be different next time? So just to reinforce this link between education and creativity. We know that this is from Sir Ken Robinson, Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative. Good teachers and educational professionals know that it's their role to engage and inspire their students. That is the creative process itself. And I think there's something, I talk to a lot of teachers about flow, and they say very often when they're teaching a lesson and it's going really, really well, they do genuinely experience this sense of flow. And I think that, like happiness and meaning, creativity is a quality that must be cultivated and worked on over many years. And it's a like happiness and meaning, it's a state we consciously make happen in spite of life's adversities. So more important than ever now, during this time of the COVID pandemic, when people are increasingly stressed, that they engage creatively on a regular basis. And I would put the argument very, very strongly that safety, nurture come first, as does creativity, over and above academic subjects. And I think this is really, really vital. I am very, very fearful of the curriculum being slimmed down with this narrative of catch up at the moment to these core academic subjects. Creativity, music, arts, drama, play, all of this stuff is so, so important at this current time. This is what engenders well-being, and it really is important more than ever at this current time that our well-being and mental health are protected, and we can do that through safety, nurture and creativity. So just to reinforce this, we know happiness, meaning and creativity evolve over the course of a lifetime. These are the things that give us pleasure and joy for the whole of our lives. So for me, it's about lifelong learning too. And I think it's really, really important. If we're willing to tenaciously pursue creativity, then the benefits for us are huge. They're enormous. It's a real challenge, I think. But I think this is more important than ever. So as part of our self-care strategies, we need to be thinking about flow and creativity as part of our self-care toolbox. We need to remember that we can only therapeutically parent, which we all need to do now, therapeutically parent or support when we are regulated, when our own nervous systems are regulated. So we have to really think in terms of self-care about 4 key factors here: our physical needs, our intellectual needs, our emotional needs, and our support needs. And nurturing our empathic brain is what I call it. So in terms of intellectual needs, thinking and learning, ideas and stimulation, how we actually nurture that element. Support, what practical, financial, emotional, feelings understood and accepted needs do we have in place? What do we need here? Okay, so we need to feel understood, we need to feel accepted, so we need to make sure that within our lives we have those people who can ensure that we do feel understood and accepted. We need to have the right financial support, clearly all of us, and there's a huge amount of stress and anxiety around this at the moment for many people, particularly from lower income households or those in the gig economy. But practically, what do we need in terms of support needs? And emotional needs, being in touch with feelings, being able to talk about them, having access to support, to peer groups, supervision in a school context, for example. And our physical needs. We talk a lot about this. When people talk about self-care in the first instance, they do tend to focus on physical needs. And people who don't really get it talk about, this is all about getting your hair done and looking after yourself, going to spas, etc. Well, it clearly is not. It's much, much more than that. It's all of these key 4 areas, but the physical needs are much wider than that. It's about your actual physical activity, your exercise, but your eating, your diet, your sleeping, your ability to relax, and how you do that effectively. So once again, I'd like you to stop the presentation if you can at this point, if you're working together or on your own, it doesn't matter. And just think about those 4 dimensions of yourself, the pies, okay? So your physical needs, your intellectual needs, your emotional needs, and your support needs. And then write down the activities under each of those 4 headings that actually work for you currently. And we know that each one of us will probably have different things in our pies, and sections will vary in size depending on our interests, personalities, our circumstances. For example, my emotional needs might be larger than some, my physical needs definitely would be. And I think it's really, really important to also factor into our thinking that our pies might also change over time. And I think for many of us at the moment, our emotional needs and support needs are going to be really, really far more significant for us because of the heightened levels of anxiety and the emotional labour involved in supporting children and young people through the transition back to school during this COVID-19 pandemic. So at a whole school level, we need to now be thinking immediately in terms of self-care and nurture and support about relational safety for all of us, about how we can ensure that people can find their calm, how they can have a level of autonomy within a situation where there is seemingly very little of it, how we can connect with each other to then ensure that we get a sense of meaning and hope for the future. So at a whole school level right now, I think we can be thinking very much about focusing on what we can control. Let's shift the narrative and move away from what we can't, because what we can't control is not going to make us feel better, it's going to make us feel worse. We know what we can't control. Let's shift the narrative and focus on what we can control. And this will involve part of it in us retelling stories of our strengths and evaluating those and actually really bringing them out into the open. And ensuring this sense of community connection. We are in this together, and part of self-care is that we take care of ourselves so that we can care for others. We can care for each other, our whole staff team, our peer group, and the children themselves. And sometimes I think maybe in a school context it might be useful to think about setting up collective self-care space for 20 minutes each day or once a week, or maybe 10 minutes at the beginning or the end of a staff meeting or briefing, where we share skills and strengths and ideas and only focus on the positive. And that might sound cheesy, but there's something very, very affirming and positive about sharing those strengths and skills and ideas. And actually we learn from each other, and this is part of possibly also the process of peer group supervision. It could be incorporated into that too. But collective self-care space for 20 minutes, a fantastic tool. And also don't forget that part of self-care is actually using our mobile phones wisely, using social media wisely. So there are lots and lots of different apps that we can download and put on our phones, Mood Panda, Calm Harm, etc., which will, has to have a positive impact if we're going to use them appropriately and regularly. And certainly I recommend these to children and young people, and there are many out there that I think are appropriate for us as adults too. And what I have done very, very recently is actually produce this toolbox of wellbeing for Hinton House publishers. And I did this because I was so concerned when I overheard a child's conversation with his mum when he didn't want her to go to work because he thought she might die. He was so worried because she was a key worker. And I came home and I just thought again and again about this and how stressful that was for her, for him, and that there was something about just having immediate access to something you could pick up and say, look, these are things that we can do to help both of us self-regulate, and let's do this together. So I've written this primarily so that if you're a mum or a dad or a teacher, a TA, whoever, you can pick it up, and there's stuff in here that you can just read very, very quickly. It's only about 70 odd pages long, and actually gives you some really good evidence-based tools and strategies from a range of different therapeutic approaches, and it's done in really straightforward, practical, easy to use language, understand language, and I think this is really, really important. So activities for our children, teens, and us as the adults, carers, teachers, parents, and that's vital. We're going to model this stuff. We need to be regulated, as I said earlier, ourselves, in order to support our children in this process. So it's jammed full of practical advice and support, which ultimately, in my view, aims to protect and support the mental health and well-being at a time which I think we're all experiencing of real uncertainty and real fear. It's underlying all the time. And the activities in this little book are divided into 3 sections under 3 key trauma recovery approaches. Now, there are activities for younger children, for teenagers, and whole groups or classes. Very, very simple, very straightforward to make use of. The 3 key trauma recovery approaches are self-regulate for well-being, get moving mentally and physically for well-being, and connect for well-being. And if you think back to the pies, there's a direct link between that. So, the activity that you underwent there, you will see if you want to actually look at this book and get some more ideas to actually fill your pies, then I think you will find them in this little book. And this is one of the ones for the adolescents, for the teens, and this is called ACT. So there are many ways of managing emotions and boosting well-being and self-esteem, and they can be placed under these 3 key headings: active ones, calming ones, and thinking ones. And the teens are asked to identify what they do now for each one and what they could do more of. Make a list of what they could do and try to think about how many times each week they actually do these things to boost positive feelings and emotions. So asking them to keep what I call an ACT diary for a week, so they can work it out, what worked when, what didn't work so well, so what they might need to adapt, to change. So again, this is very, very similar to your pies activity. And also these are some more examples from the book. So there's worry time, a calm down jar, how to make one, how to use cognitive restructuring, mindfulness activities, relaxation activities, breathing and grounding activities. The children and young people are taught how to make use of anxiety ladders to gradually be able to manage their fears and anxieties. There are 3 kind acts, 3 good things, some journaling ideas, flow moments, and we've talked about those in the presentation today. Activity scheduling again, sorting out what you can do on a weekly basis in order to actually gain flow and to make use of your wellbeing toolkit. Visualization and fitness challenge. So really, really straightforward, simple activities, but it's jam-packed full of them. So in terms of self-care, I'm finally going to leave you with what I call my 10 top tips for adults and children. And I think these still remain pertinent. I often talk through these because I find that I need to reinforce them for myself too. And it is around building positive beliefs in our abilities and reminding ourselves of our strengths and not comparing ourselves to others. This still holds true in terms of self-care. One of the most important things we can do is not compare ourselves to other people. It's the royal route to suffering. We need to actually look at what we can do and value that and find some affirmation in that for ourselves. Also finding a sense of purpose, doing things for others. And it sounds old-fashioned, but there's something very, very powerful that's come out of this pandemic, this awareness that doing good makes you feel good, that we have a duty, responsibility, dare I say it, to others who are finding it harder than us, and actually doing good, being kind and compassionate matters more than ever, and more than anything else actually at this point in time, but I think it always has done. Developing that strong social network. So as I said earlier, getting rid of those people who do pull us down, make us feel bad, the narcissists who manipulate us. We don't need them. They're bad for our mental health and well-being. And embracing change. It's really important. We will survive this if we learn how to be flexible and we adapt. We can still thrive, notwithstanding what is going on at the moment, but we need to actually be flexible and go with it and try and find new ways of connecting with each other emotionally when we can't do so often physically. Being optimistic as well is really, really important. Setbacks can be learnt from, mistakes can be learnt from, and developing that growth mindset. Absolutely vital. And also this self-nurture, nurturing ourselves in the right way, making a self-care plan that really is effective and it really is appropriate and healthy, genuinely healthy. Very, very important. And again, reminding ourselves of our strengths and not comparing. Also developing and practicing our problem-solving skills. We get better at this the more that we do it, which is why also problem-solving frameworks are included in the wellbeing toolbox. Setting goals that are realistic, breaking them down into manageable chunks, which is what I talked about in the presentation too. Really, really essential that we don't overstretch, that we make them so that we can achieve them bit by bit and praise ourselves as we get to each little bit of that goal and we achieve each step. So taking steps to solve problems and focusing on the progress we've made. We're not too good at that. We don't want to pat ourselves on the back, and I think we need to do a bit more of that in our culture. And rather than becoming discouraged by the amount of work we've still got to do, then, just actually really praise ourselves for what we've done at this point in time before we then move on. And we need to keep going. Ultimately, what's really, really important, self-care is an ongoing journey. Resilience is an ongoing journey. Being happier and staying well and gaining a healthier lifestyle is a journey, and we need to keep on it. We need to keep on it, and we need to do it together with compassion and kindness. So finally, self-care for parents and teachers in this COVID-19 pandemic is an essential if we are going to support and nurture our children and young people effectively. And I'd ask you to take away from this presentation today the reflection question: how will I do this? What resources and skills will I use? And how will I sustain my well-being and avoid the potential for compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma? So thinking about this, take this away. Please go away and think about it. And actually, from my perspective, I would write down your answer and I'd go back and reflect on it and think about it. And just ultimately remember this: self-care, it's essential, it is not selfish. So some web resources, you might want to follow these links, particularly the positive psychology, much of which my work is based on. So thank you once again for listening, and hopefully you've actually been able to engage in some of the activities in this session. I do think that it's one of the most important sessions. At this point in time, we all have to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, we're really thinking about our well-being, and making sure that we do so in a systematic way, and we don't give up on this, because it's vital now that we maintain this well-being and sense of well-being, and we do it together so that we can really support and nurture our kids through this pandemic and beyond it, because we will get beyond it. So thanks again, and I hope that you join me in the next sessions. I'm hoping after this session to do a few more of the CPD coffee times, but also I am thinking increasingly that I'm going to do some shorter sessions, and they will possibly just look at resources, specific techniques, ideas and strategies that you might want to use, and maybe just do 10-15 minute bursts. Dare I say, I might even film them, but I'm not quite so sure about that because I'm not I don't really want to show my face too often. But if you've got any ideas, or you think of something and you'd like me to talk about it, or you think I might be able to, then please just get in touch. You've got my email on this last slide here, and also my Twitter feed. But it'd be really good if you emailed directly and then said, this is something I'd like you to talk about or present on. It'd be really, really helpful. So thanks again. Bye bye.